The year is 1979, and director Milos Forman followed up his Oscar-winning film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with this musical adaptation of the hit Broadway show about the turning point of American culture. Treat Williams, John Savage, and Beverly D'Angelo play three Americans from very different upbringings. One's a farm boy off to war, one's an uptight socialite, and the other is a homeless, carefree leader of a vagabond tribe living in Central Park. As the love triangle of this trio plays out, we are gifted with colorful and memorable songs that not only grace the Broadway stage, but the radio waves as well. Skillfully crafted scenes of dance and performance, and of course, the political message of conformity and differentiation drilled into our heads. In this first episode of Musical March, it's Milos Forman's Hair. Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, two titans of cinematic review. Sometimes right, sometimes wrong, but always captivating. Your hosts Antonio of the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast and Justin Henson of the Movie Wire are here to take you back to the balcony. And we all know that I am not the biggest fan of musicals. There are some cult musicals that I can't help not but enjoy. Rocky Horror, Shock Treatment, Voyage of the Rock Aliens. But when it comes to the Broadway adaptations, I think that's my biggest hurdle, man. I like it when there are musicals that are written directly for the screen and they're little, off base, off topic, not so theatrical. And this one being a stage adaptation, but a stage adaptation of a show that was already kind of counterculture to begin with, I think that's why I was more receptive to it. And of course, we're talking about Milos Forman's Hair. So what are your thoughts on this movie?
And I'm opposite to you. I am completely biased when it comes to musicals. There's only a handful of musicals that really just kind of crap the bed for me. So when it comes to this is one that really does resonate with me when it comes to the messaging, and musicals aren't all about messaging. We're going to get into that next week, I'm sure, of my pick, but this is one that is made for adults. It's made for kind of the ones that seek more depth in their musical. And like you said, not being so theatrical, not being so happy-go-lucky, let's see what we can do on supplementing the music over the substance. This is one that really does balance all categories of what makes a good musical. So Hair, I absolutely loved.
Yeah, and I think, too, like the fact that this was the musical that broke the mold for the Broadway stage, in the late 60s when it came out. There was kind of like a stuffed shirt, theatrical enthusiasm about productions back then on Broadway, where, you had to have the boy and the girl and all that other stuff like that. And here were hippies getting naked on stage. I think that's the one thing that people were most talkative about. And being able to translate that into film, I think not only is impressive, but the fact that it's 12, 13 years after the fact, where we are just right going into the 80s. We're in a different mindset. We're in a different societal state. Yet somehow this does feel relevant to the age, even though it's reflecting on a time that was more than a decade past. The Vietnam War, the counterculture, the hippies versus the socialites. And it's not a counterculture film in the sense of there's street wars and gang wars and stuff like that. It really is people who are avoiding the draft, what the war means, and then the socialites that essentially run everything, control everything, and have this uptight sensibility about them. And then the John Savage character kind of being somewhere right in the middle. And which way is he going to go? I think that is the thing that I really like about this musical. But I'll tell you right off the bat, if there's one thing I don't like about this adaptation of it is I just don't like John Savage's performance. I feel like he's so blasé, and I'm not sure if that's intentional. Maybe I'm not familiar enough with the original show or with what this character is supposed to represent, but I just felt like he's so bland that Beverly D'Angelo and Treat Williams, who are both amazing, and they play like the pulling sides to him, like one's trying to pull him one way and the other's trying to pull him the other. I feel he almost makes them look better than they already are because they're already great by how bland he is. What were your thoughts on that?
So when it comes to John Savage, I don't think he does a horrible job. I think where the
Right.
problem lays is between Treat Williams and his chemistry, because there, to me, there is supposed to be a contradiction, and there's supposed to be an exaggerated contradiction from stage to screen,
Mhm.
and we should be able to see that on stage more often than we see him on screen. Here, I think the adaptation doesn't give them enough. It doesn't give them enough than other than just dressing them up in a suit or the hair or the hippie outfit. So to me, there's no substance or dialogue to really separate these two. So I think it kind of goes into the meh category when it comes to an adaptation on screen. So that was what I was going to get into a little bit later, is that was my only issue, is the emotional stakes when it comes to the chemistry of specifically these two, which when we get into the climax has to be important. It has to have a good crescendo going into it where we feel the climax is something of an emotional impact for us. And between the two of them, we don't really get that. This is where I think musicals to me really need to have that impact, because as a lot of people that love musicals know, the second half is always the most limp. It's always the
Mhm.
most one to really kind of just say, we're going to bank on the first half to gain your attention, and then it just goes nowhere. And this Green adaptation really does show that on multiple levels. Even though I love Hair, I think this is a prime example of where the movie really does lose its steam in that the second half of the movie, and it doesn't really earn that emotional stake that the climax thinks it's going for.
And I just read the synopsis of the stage play. I've never seen it. I've never like read the book to it. I've never even listened to the original score of it. I am so unfamiliar with the stage production. I know they took a lot of creative liberties with the film to give it a more complete ending. The ending is different than the movie and then the stage play. So I'm going to give it a pass on some of those things because I'm just not familiar enough with the original material. However, whatever they do here works for me. It works mostly because they do make Treat Williams such a almost otherworldly character. The dynamic that I realized halfway through the movie on like this, third watch. I've seen this movie several times and I owned it, and I had my son watch it because he picked it out because the cover was cool one day, and I watched it with him and he had a blast, even though he didn't understand like the context and the politics of it. But if there's one thing that I've noticed the last couple rewatches, is that I feel like there is a real kind of Edward Norton, Brad Pitt, Tyler Durden kind of chemistry going on here. I'm not saying that Treat Williams is a figment of John Savage's imagination, but I think Treat Williams definitely represents all the things that he could be, and in deep down, I think kind of wants to be if he wasn't so drilled into this mind of Midwestern conservative culture of being a farm boy who's going off to war and serve his country, who is fascinated by this vagabond lifestyle that these people have. And what is freedom? Is freedom going to, war and fight for someone that is not of your political mindset? You're fighting for a whole other country's politics, instilling your politics into theirs, or is freedom what Treat Williams and his crew are, living in Central Park, essentially begging people for money or finding their own money or breaking into fancy black tie parties? I liked that part of the movie where we are seeing John Savage taking the leap into this other kind of lifestyle. And there's lots of movies and plays that have played that similar theme, but the chemistry and the songs, I think, is what really make it for me. And then Beverly Lee D'Angelo being kind of like the conflict of the movie, where, he falls in love with her. She is fascinated by him, but also as a socialite, she's fascinated by the vagabond lifestyle too. And while it's not a true love triangle, I'd say it's more of like a love triangle of experimentation of the classes than it is a physical attraction to those people. I think that's the point of this movie, is it plays on a lot deeper levels than one would think, especially on the first watch.
I've always said when it comes to a musical, if you can take two, maybe three musical numbers out of it that really resonate and you can visualize the performance after you're done, that's a successful musical. And here, this movie kind of sets it up on a high note. You have Age of Aquarius, where you get the authoritarian contrast between our outcasts, if you will. And then it kind of just goes south a little bit, where we bank on a lot of the characters just kind of representing the rebellion. And then we go into songs that we get the crashing of the party, we get the songs of rebellion. But this is where I think the musical aspect of it falters is there's really nothing to kind of lead up to that. And it relies a lot on the musical aspect of it to really deep dive into the symbolic nature of the musical lyrics. And it takes a couple rewatches. And this is one of those rare musicals that will require a rewatch to really listen not just to the dialogue, but to the music, because this movie really relies on the music to kind of carry the message along to where the outcome's going to go with these two characters. And again, great performance, especially by D'Angelo, when it comes to how they're representing and how they're expressing their emotions with the dialogue. But this is one of those that the musical numbers really do matter when it comes to how you're going to really be impacted by this movie. Is it doesn't rely on just spoken words, it relies on the music lyrics to really carry this story. So that's where this musical is going to be really different to a couple of the musicals we're going to be talking about this month. Is this one, the music out of all the musicals we talk about this month will matter.
The songs in this movie, yes, they are very pertinent to what's going on in the film in particular scene. However, I feel like they are not narrative songs that help move the story along. If anything, they're expressionist songs of what the culture is and what these people are and their characterizations, especially hair and white boys, black boys. It's really got nothing to do with the story. It's got really nothing to do to push the story forward. It is almost like we are getting a lyrical version of these character descriptions of these people, their personalities, their wants, their desires, and then we go back to the movie. Again, I'm not a huge fan of musicals, but I like that type of musical. I like it when we can put a song in there that is more describing the person and the situation than, oh, this song is literally just another piece of the dialogue. The song is just another way to move the story forward and explain what's happening, but not explain the person. I like that about this musical. And, chorus line is kind of the same way. In fact, I think the chorus line is nothing but that. All the songs are literally about these people and who they are. And I like that more than, let's say, a Music Man or a Sound of Music, where that is going to be part of the narrative. Maybe that's my own bias towards musicals, but this does it perfectly. And Milos Forman is a master director. Even though musicals are not his, let's say, niche, the visualization that he brings to the musical makes it feel better than the staginess that we've seen in musicals past, right? I'm almost going to say it's almost like a performance art, the way he stages these musical numbers. And yeah, I totally dig it.
So the way he actually just does the opening scene sets a huge forte on what we're about to see, because it is an absolutely fantastic opening number. It's well choreographed. It's enjoyable to watch. And this is what really hooked me into this movie, is especially when we take the choreographed horses stomping their feet versus the human. So this is one of those that it's a hit or miss with a lot of the numbers in this film, but when he nails it, he nails it. And the camera shots that we see focusing on the characters, not the musical aspect of it. He zooms in on the emotional reactions while our characters are singing their songs, while they're trying to make an impact with these musical numbers. That's where you couldn't tell me that if somebody presented Foreman to me saying he never did a musical, I would call them a liar, because I think, especially in the first half, not so much the second, but the first half, he absolutely nails it, where it's almost perfection on. I would think he would be doing this for years when it comes to musical direction, because he knows how to zero in on just the whole point. He knows how important these musical numbers are when it comes to capturing the emotional element of these characters.
I like the fact that, like, if we look at his previous films, I mean, the most notable one, of course, is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which it turns the asylum essentially into a character. There's characters within the character. And then Amadeus after this, where we are looking at not only the classical music scene of the 1500s or 1600s, but it's opera. Like we feel like we are watching an opera, even though it's a narrative film about an opera. He knows how to make the environment and the set piece just as much a live character as the performers that are acting in it. And I think that's what makes him a very unique director. And we'll get into more about him once we get into the critique. But yeah, like I really, really, really love the way this movie is directed. And even if it wasn't a musical, I would still dig the story and the way it was made because the visuals tell a story just as much as the characters do. And we've watched enough films where it does too much of one and not enough of the other, and it works both ways. Too much character, not enough set piece, not enough grandeur in the filmmaking, or that's all it is, and we've forgotten about the characters because they're just not interesting. This is a great blend. So yeah, I like this. I like this a lot. For the first musical I'm bringing to Musical March, this might be my favorite. I haven't watched the two that you're bringing yet because I'm, waiting to the last minute. But of the two that I brought, this is definitely the one I'm like, man, this is just really good. It might even be like one of my favorite film musicals. I could easily put it in the top 5 for sure.
Well, it's a good musical because it actually makes you think, it actually impacts you, and by the time the credits roll, you actually feel like you wanna go back and see what you missed in a couple different elements here, because even when we get to the climax, just in relatability when it comes to kind of that era, that we can understand the fear, we can understand the emotion from it and the "oh crap" piece of it. So there is something where it doesn't feel to over explain itself, because we get kind of the simplistic explanation in the first musical number. And then when we get to the end, it kind of it's like folding a piece of paper where we can kind of figure out what happens in between, but we exploit the in between and we kind of really deep dive into the characters because we can foresee kind of what the outcome might be to an extent of the authoritarian figure or the rebellion and going into the Vietnam War. But it's how it's explained along the journey of these characters that really build the stakes of how we're going to react to the ending. I think the double edged sword of this movie is that it has so many interesting characters that it doesn't really have time to explore because this is a movie full of great performances and it really wanted me wanting more from a lot of the side characters. We get a scene where we get kind of the confrontation of the baby's mama. We kind of get the cheating aspect of it. And I wanted to zero in on that a little bit more to kind of see what the background is with these characters. And I think if that was a flaw, a positive flaw, is that it made me like these side characters so much that I wanted everything to kind of go to the side and zero in on these characters and their background.
I understand why it is the way it is. Like it makes sense to me, but maybe it's just like I'm expecting more. I don't understand the attraction from Beverly D'Angelo to him, but I can understand the attraction of Treat Williams to turn him. It's again, it's a Tyler Durden, Edward Norton dynamic. But I agree with you. The side characters like Don Dacus as Wolf, of course, Dorsey Wright as Hud, who we should all know from The Warriors, and then who else we got? Annie Golden is Jeannie, and I think Jeannie is kind of like the one that steals the show of the side characters. She's kind of like the tag along. She has a deep love that's unreciprocated, and that's always like my favorite character in a movie is the one that's like the ride or die, even though she's not really the one that gets the guy at the end. Or girl, Last American Virgin, that kind of dynamic. I'm a sucker for that dynamic. But yeah, like I think that really works well. And again, I'm not sure if all these characters are represented in the Broadway musical. So I'm almost afraid to even go and listen to that or watch a stage version of it because I like this telling of this story so much.
Well, it's almost like I agree with you with the Genie character. I think that one in this adaptation is completely underutilized. My fingers were crossed saying she needs a bigger standalone song. She
Right.
needs her own emotional output. I mean, there is so much thrown at Jeannie um, in different aspects, from being on the sidelines, watching these characters interact, seeing how they build chemistry, to seeing her pregnant with a baby. There's so much emotion here, and we don't really, she doesn't have her moment. And I think that's where I really am frustrated with the side character aspect, because if it was a stage play, and again, I haven't seen the stage play, but this is where this character would be in center stage with a spotlight on her and singing her emotions. And we see that with a lot of the characters, a lot of the primary characters, but we don't see it with a character that has a lot of emotional baggage that needs to be heard. And we get hints at that, but we never really fully explore it. So if I were to say one character out of this, the missed adaptation piece of it would be the Genie character.
And before we get into our critics' reviews, I mean, I just gotta say, like, I know it's been over a year now, but like, rest in peace, Treat Williams. The dude was a superstar, in my opinion. Maybe not A plus, A list superstar throughout his career, but there was never a Treat Williams performance that I thought was bad. He was always good, even in the B movies, even in the Substitute sequels. Right? I love that dude, and this really was like the showcase for him. I mean, not only is he putting out a great performance, but he's singing as well, which I didn't know he had such a great voice. He's got great presence. I'm not going to say stage presence, you know what I mean, but like just his body language and the way he dances and moves. There's a talent there, there's training there that I feel like he didn't get to use throughout his career, at least on film, as much as he did here. So like I can't say that I'm a Treat Williams completionist. I know I've seen way more Treat Williams movies than I feel like I should have, because he made a lot of B movies in the latter half of his career. But, this is kind of like the apex, in my opinion, and it's the start of his career. And that gorgeous hair.
Deep Rising is still one of my favorites of his, because it's
Yeah,
so
100%.
underrated for the time. But you're absolutely right. I mean, this is where my passion for musical theater is, because it should be a training program for anybody getting into movies. Just like if you want to box, you take ballet classes, whatnot, because this is where you learn the fundamentals. This is where you learn how to balance multiple different emotional elements and genres, if you will. And this is one that really does showcase where he grows with his body language later in his career. And I want to say that a lot of his B movie kind of charisma comes from hair, because you have to have that kind of that stage presence. You have to have that over exaggeration a little bit, even if it is a screen adaptation, that this has to be over exaggerated a little bit. And it's okay to be over exaggerated on screen, as long as there's intent around the fun factor or outputting your emotion. And we see that here, and we even see that in a lot of his performances in the future, that it's respectable, because it's not a false pretense of just being kind of an amateur actor. He's an experienced actor, and he knows exactly what he's doing when it comes to stealing the spotlight in a respectable way. And we get that groundwork here with hair. Is you have to be the character, you have to be able to sing with the same character persona, and you have to express the emotion without outshining the rest of your castmates. So here, I think, is the pure foundation of where we saw his career really grow.
I mean, it's kind of like a Great Gatsby kind of story, right? Like, our main character is John Savage, just like it's Nick in Great Gatsby, but that's not the character we're invested in. We're invested in the Gatsby character, and in this case, it's George. It's his character. It's Treat Williams, and I love that, because it just takes a little bit of a sidestep from a traditional narrative, and it is so good. Okay, so when I picked this movie, I had not seen the critique of Siskel and Ebert, but once I did, I realized that I knew them pretty well, because it went exactly as I anticipated.
It was one of the most successful musicals of the 1960s, but I would have guessed it somehow to be hopelessly dated by now, a relic of the age of Aquarius, along with hippies and flower power and love beads. Remember love beads? I would have guessed wrong. The new film version by Milos Forman takes the strings of the original musical, including a lot of great songs, and combines them with a contemporary, fresh approach, just a perfect distillation of the way American society was polarized during the Vietnam era. And in fact, one of the best things about this completely alive and successful movie version of Hair is that it captures so exactly some of the feelings of America in the 1960s. It's a musical, yes, with all the great hits we remember, like The Age of Aquarius, Good Morning Starshine, but it's also an accurate memory of what things were like 10 or 12 years ago. And it's like West Side Story or Cabaret in this, that it manages to be serious and joyous at the same time. It's a good movie.
I mean, obviously, Roger was going to like it.
Well, he's going to like it, but I got to give him some respect here because he is going to show that boy nostalgia. He's going to reflect on this movie. Both of them were around during the Vietnam War and the era of this. I get it. But I have to give him respect on the presentation here, where he takes himself down a notch, where he is just speaking, and it's almost like you can feel him go through the journey of nostalgia, of just remembering this era. And I love that about what he just read, because I'm following along and I'm cracking a smile as this review is going on, because I've been to movies, I've been to musicals, I've been to even stage plays that just take me down that journey. And Roger was able to do that in just this brief snippet of how I feel when I walk out of a good movie, musical, or theater play, of just if it connected with me. And that's what I really did appreciate about Roger's little piece on this.
No, I agree. And something that he said that I think is very relevant to the conversation is, the idea that when this came out, is it too early to be nostalgic? And is it not late enough to be, let's say, a parable of what could happen to the country? And now that we've been through several wars since this thing has gone on, came out in the 1979, I think the different generations can look at this movie a little bit differently. Milos Forman, even though this movie had great critical response, it was a box office failure. And he always says the same thing that Gene was kind of referring to, that it was just a little too early to be truly nostalgic, but there wasn't really anything going on in the country at the time that could be relatable to what the story is having to tell. Maybe if they waited like another, 10 years, the Iraq War, maybe, I don't know. But when this movie came out, the conflict really wasn't there. The country was like kind of on the up and up economically. And so this was kind of like a fluff piece for the audience at the time. And I think that's such an interesting thing when you like look at reviews and the box office of movies and when they came out and maybe when they were actually set. And then they seem so much more relatable and relevant in a different era than when they came out, and they get a whole new appreciation. And I think we're seeing a lot of that now with other movies too, especially with streaming. People have more access to movies. This isn't a film I hear talked about a lot, but I wouldn't be surprised if it starts getting more attention, especially when political climates change. Movies like this usually pop up out of the woodwork, and all of a sudden they have like a new appreciation.
Now, this is where I'm going to have kind of a slight disagree, is we can take a movie with a political subject line on it, but to feel nostalgic doesn't have to be the main primary topic, because we do have relationship builds, we have friendship builds, we have the situational pieces of it, that could be dark, it could be ugly, but with any dark or ugly subject matter comes anything underneath that can become positive. And I think that's what this movie really does. And I think Roger, even though he understands the subject matter of it, isn't focusing on that per se. And I think a lot of people, when they saw this movie, focused on the Vietnam piece of it, but they didn't resonate with the subject matter of what's underneath that. And I think that's where I saw the subtleness in Roger's voice of explaining the nostalgic value. He's not being subtle and soft-spoken because of the Vietnam War. He is resonating with these characters that do find a light in the darkness, that really do find some love. And that's where I think this movie really fortes itself, is not focusing on the war aspect of it, the politics per se, even though that is a main exclamation mark. This movie, its entire runtime is focused on how these characters grow as one, how these friendships are built. And I think that is the main point of this movie, is just that. Yeah, like I said in the beginning, we have kind of the authoritarian Age of Aquarius, where we get the contradiction between the characters. That's where we set the tone. And then we get the climax that kind of puts the period on it, but it's the journey in between. And the journey isn't about the Vietnam War. It's about social classes and how we overcome these social classes to build relationships. So I think Gene is going to be a little bit off base on this one, but I think people kind of lost the point when this movie came out.
But they also lived through it. And I think that's the big difference, is that there is going to be a nostalgia that people who are around at this time were going to have that we don't. And I'd say that this particular counterculture movement, in my opinion, was the last great one because it wasn't manufactured. I feel like any little counterculture movement that you and I have gone through the 80s and the 90s, like with the grunge culture and then the emo culture, those countercultures to me were all manufactured by Hot Topic and record labels and MTV and stuff like that. This to me feels like it's like the last organic counterculture movement that we saw, and everything else after it is basically the Gap version of it. So I get what he's saying when he talks about the nostalgia of it, because it felt real. It didn't feel like it was, put together by a marketing label, which is how I feel a lot of them do. And now we live in an era where there really is no counterculture. Like, we're all just kind of tuned into social media and movies and music and things like that. And we don't have hippies. I mean, unless you want to count the Nomadland van people, which, that's very few and far between. They're not out making political statements like the people in Hair were. But, I digress. That's not what the conversation's about. But I do think that the nostalgia of the people that lived through that time is going to be different than us who are watching it with, let's say, a nostalgic view of someone else's nostalgia. It's a kaleidoscope, essentially. Anyway, Gene retorts.
I think it's better than that. I think it's great. And what I love about it is most movie musicals, as soon as somebody starts to sing, the action really stops. Here, they blend in beautifully. We saw it. That woman says to him, "You got a lot of nerve," and he responds, "I got life." It fits beautifully. A nice screenplay. Very well done.
I think you're right. One thing that's interesting about it, directed by a man named Milos Forman, who's from Czechoslovakia. His previous big movie in this country is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Academy Award winner.
A lot of Academy Awards. In both of these films, he shows a real feeling for American society, even though he's in exile, And I was thinking, maybe it's because both of these films are about exiles within American society, people who don't really fit and who feel left out.
Both films are also about freedom, if you want. Nicholson trying to get out of that hospital, and these kids trying to be free, America trying to free itself of some really tough conflicts. I think this film is so darn good because it's actually like a documentary. If you were writing a newspaper story on what America was like in the conflicts, you'd use quotes like that from that MP, who actually is played by a real MP, not an actor. Oh, it's awfully good. I recommend this film as highly as anything we've got on the show.
Two immediate yeses, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Both Roger and I can't praise enough the movie version of the musical Hair. We give it our highest recommendation. The yeses next to our names mean, yes, we recommend you see this picture, which is rated PG.
So one of the things that I really liked about what Gene says about this film, and it's where I totally agree with, is the idea that musicals, like I said before, when a song interrupts the action just to be a song, let's call it a soliloquy, right? It's just not really moving the story forward, where this, I feel like it's moving the film forward, not the story. And that's why I like it. It doesn't feel like this is a break in the action. The action goes along with the song, almost completing the scene that the song starts in and finishes, and then the scene transitions. That is the energy that I was talking about in a film like this, where I feel most musicals, especially like Rodgers and Hammerstein ones, oh my God, they literally, it's almost like edging you as an audience member, right? You're really into the scene, and then, oh, everyone stop, we have to sing now. That doesn't happen in this movie.
Oh, We have a lot of those musicals, especially plays to movies, especially prior to the 70s, I would say, that's what people were seeking out. We wanted to be prepared for the next musical number. We didn't want to be taken by surprise, so we just had these
Right.
insertions of prepping the audience, saying, "Get ready, here it comes." But we've evolved as an audience, and Hollywood's evolved, and the attention spans evolved, where we want something more. And we can't say that with a lot of genres out there where we want something more of substance other than Hollywood blockbusters or explosions and all that, where we need a smooth transitions to really carry and support the movie with song. And I think Hair was one of those musicals that really did kind of twist the way we do things when it comes to the genre. Now, the musicals going into the future of the 80s, 90s, we saw it devolve from that. And maybe musicals weren't ready for that kind of transition. Maybe people at that time wanted those obvious musical numbers to pop in and we wanted to anticipate it without any depth. We wanted those happy-go-lucky musicals, or Mel Brooks said it best, is to keep it gay when it comes to musicals. Keep it happy, keep it fun, keep it light. And this is a deeper message when it comes to that. And I think when it came to the release, people didn't really want a Vietnam musical. They didn't really want a lot of these hard topic musicals. We wanted the fun musicals. So I think this one is underrated, but there's a reason it was a success on stage, is because it was able to really resonate with the audience and be there live and connect with the audience. But when it comes to buying a ticket to the theater, that's where people really were taken back a little bit. And I think Gene really does nail it on how subtle, because we see even Gene match Rogers' tone on this review of subtleness of talking about this topic, but really talking about it in a way that we can appreciate it. It's a deep topic, it's a musical, but it's an adult musical that is rated
Mhm.
PG. So this is one of those that is really resonating with how parents are going to react to taking their kids to it, or is it just going to be an adult musical? So just in both of their tones really tells a story on what kind of musical this is.
Yeah, because I mean, we were out of the era of musicals already. We were in New Hollywood. People were watching Cassavetes movies and Sidney Lumet movies, crime movies, Dog Day Afternoon. Like, that is the era this is in. I don't think people were lining up to go see a musical. I mean, even the musicals of, let's say, the early to mid 70s, people really didn't care either. It reminds me of when we did the Pale Rider episode, how they said, oh, it's been a decade since we've seen these people make a good Western. I feel like this is how they felt with the musical. It's like, this is refreshing. This is a return to a genre that they both appreciated, but just didn't get a lot of because the movie going public was not into musicals at the moment. So I think it was a pleasant surprise for them. And that's the other thing too, is like they don't mention the box office. It probably didn't have final receipts at that point, but just goes to show that a raving review doesn't also mean you're going to get great box office, because it didn't. And they gave it a glowing review. One of the, I'd say, most positive reviews that we've covered on this show so far. So yeah, it didn't always lie in their hands as much as some people think it did when it comes to the success of a film. And Siskel and Ebert were going to be either your victor or your masochist.
Well, it reminded me of, I remember when The Producers, the musical, came out, and I sat in that theater, and I think I saw that movie like 2 or 3 times. About 20 minutes in, you get probably half the audience walking up and walking out saying, it's a musical." So musicals is that one genre that really does split audiences, that you either love it or you hate it. And there's very little that just tolerate it unless you're on a date or whatnot. So musicals to me are really one of those genres that really are challenging, not necessarily for the cast, but they're a good training mechanism for the cast, but for filmmakers. Are they able to balance it? Are they able to balance the storytelling, the music, and not just inserting music to insert music, but does it really progress the story? And that could be like we talked about. Could that be maybe being a little bit of filler that makes sense, or does it explain the character motivation? It's all about the intent when it comes to a musical, and this is one of those. The intent is clear on what it's trying to do. It does a great job on balance because you don't get that musical number that talks about the emotion, and then you have that filler towards the second act that just is just there to move the story along. Hair is one of those musicals that makes it clear from the beginning to the end that it's going to be there to explain the progress of the character development, of the emotion spoken on screen. And this is where the small handful of musicals that I hate really do get it wrong, is that there is no balance. The filmmaking is wrong. You can have the best dance scenes, you can have the best casted musical, but if you aren't balanced on what you're trying to do when it comes to telling a story with the music, then it's going to be an absolute flop and the audience is going to hate it.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% on that statement because I hate most musicals, but if one wins me over, I tell you, like, I'm loyal for life. Like, if you can win me over with your musical, I'll be a fan and I will put it on my shelf. One of these days, I'll take a snapshot of the few musicals I have on there, but literally, they're like every musical I enjoy is on that shelf, and it's like a very small stack. But that's just me. Okay, so when it comes to grading our critics, I liked this movie, and everything that Gene said, I 100% agreed with. I haven't seen enough of his reviews of other musicals. We're going to have 3 more this month, so I'll get a better idea of what he's looking for in his idea of a musical. But starting with this episode, number 1, he and I are like simpatico on it, so I'm going to give him an A.
I think that's fair. And you know what? I think this is going to be the first time we match. Roger, I think I'm going to give 4 stars because I loved the presentation. I loved the intent of explaining what he loved about it without going into complete depth, without ruining the emotional depth of it. So to me, these two were on the same page and I absolutely loved it. And it's one of those, they actually were level, if that makes sense. They were neutral when it comes to their presentation, and Roger started the ball rolling with his nostalgic journey and his storytelling, the master of storytelling when it comes to reviewing a movie, and we saw that here in this review that we really haven't seen in kind of any of his reviews, where he just kind of takes his time in a soft tone to really explain why he liked this movie. So it was a treasure to actually listen to.
Yeah, no, it was a great episode, and it's a great movie. I will definitely be watching it again. It's been on my shelf for a long time because it just works for me. So next week, we are doing Justin's first pick for a musical March. He is bringing the 90s Disney musical, which is also the bane of my existence, Newsies, starring Christian Bale. And oh boy, man, I gotta tell you, I haven't seen this since 93, 94 maybe, in like one of my theater classes after seeing it in the theater and hating it. So I've got Disney Plus. I may as well use it for something other than princess movies for my 3-year-old. So let's do this.
I know that one's not sitting on your shelf, but you know what? This one, there's a reason it had a new calling to Broadway just in the last few years, and I think hopefully you change your mind.
Well, we also know that our good friend Josh Scar is a huge stan for Newsies, so he'll probably be excited for that episode as well. Anyways,
we'll wear t-shirts.
Yeah, right. Everyone, thank you for watching, listening. Please like, rate, review, give us 5 stars. You can find me, Antonio, and my show, The Cultworthy Cinema Podcast, at thecultworthy.com. You can find my co-host, Justin Henson, over at
themoviewire.com.
And I will see you next week.
See you next week.